Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Today we are excited to welcome Omar de Kok-Mercado, an Agroforestry Technical Service Provider for the Savanna Institute, a Wisconsin-based nonprofit organization focused on widespread adoption of agroforestry in the Midwest. Omar holds degrees in soil microbiology and agroecology and is using that knowledge to literally change the landscape by helping growers adopt agroforestry systems. What does that look like? Well, they're integrating trees, crops, and livestock to foster ecological resilience, climate stability, economic prosperity, and vibrant communities. Learning about these opportunities for developing and adopting resilient, scalable agroforestry, that's super exciting, and it's a great conversation. So let's jump right in.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm excited to be joined by Omar, and Omar I know him through his wife, Megan. And Megan Filbert, she's been on the podcast before. But Omar, welcome, and tell us a little bit of your story and what brings us together here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been excited to come onto the podcast and talk with you and about all things trees and livestock and perennials. I was kind of reflecting a little bit about how I got on this path of becoming a grazer and agroforester, and I realized I had to go all the way back to high school when I became a nurse's aide, which sounds totally unrelated to agriculture, but what I was actually super interested in was human nutrition and taking care of folks and going down the nursing path, and I wanted to fly helicopters and be a flight nurse. And through that process, I realized I was really interested in human nutrition and realized that I wanted to grow nutrient-dense food at the ground level, and that's how I started becoming an agroecologist and eventually a soil microbiologist. So from nursing to human nutrition to soil health, I feel like they're all really strongly interrelated. And now here I am working as a technical service provider for Savanna Institute and integrating trees and livestock, helping farmers design that and institutions integrate that as well. And on my own home farm, I'm walking the talk and reconstructing oak savannas as silvopasture and having a blast doing it.
Well, normally I do a little more on the intro side, Omar, with most of our guests, but I just wanted to throw you right out there at the beginning because I know there's going to be a lot of terms that come up today that we're going to need to backfill for people, because a lot of our listeners are farmers who are producing, maybe annual crops or perennial crops. A few are doing grazing. But what we're really talking about here is, and what you've really found to lead nutrient density, soil health, human health connections, is all three of those together: perennial crops, annual crops, and integrating livestock grazing. So this may get a little definition-y here for a minute.
No, yeah, that's great.
I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, because I've been giving a lot of thought to this lately. I just came out of the combine cab, as it shows, and I've been thinking a lot. You get a lot of quiet time to think about just what are we doing. So let's make some definitions here first. Agroforestry. Okay, so what is that? Growing timber?
Yeah, I think, I kind of dislike the term agroforestry. It's really not super accurate for what's actually going on, but really it's the integration of trees and livestock into agricultural landscapes. So agro representing agriculture and forestry representing, traditional forestry practices of timber production. But really there's a suite of practices, riparian buffers, windbreaks, alley cropping, silvopasture, and so on. And so it's really just strategic integration of trees into the row crop system.
And the trees aren't necessarily just for wood or fiber products. They can also be for nut and fruit products too, as a part of that overall system. So it's really
Correct.
looking at annual crops and maybe multiple year crops, a hay crop or something like that, along with, perennial lower story crops and higher story crops, all across the landscape with grazing critters and those kind of things underneath the canopies or within, right? So
Correct. And then
it's a small word, but it's a big realm of practices.
right. So it's really a gradient between pasture management and forest. So it's that, like, capitalizing on that savanna architecture, which is 50% canopy cover or less, and
So
then you have
agro.
that really
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. Then you have that rich understory that you can decide what you want to do with, whether that's growing row crops or growing grasses and flowers and shrubs and fruits and berries. And the other thing I want to mention too is it doesn't just have to be a tree crop from the nuts or fruit perspective or timber. It can also be a system that utilizes it for tree fodder, which is the technical term for basically hay on trees. It's feeding trees to livestock, because a lot of trees have high protein content. So we're talking poplars and locusts and mulberries, and using those in a silvopastoral system, which is like a savanna type structure, is really great, because you can coppice and pollard. Those are the technical terms for cutting something above the root collar or cutting something around chest height. And you do that strategically, depending on the conditions of the understory forage. So say like you're in a drought condition, you have trees that are growing leaves that are high in protein. You can come in there and shred that. That's the term for coming in and cutting it up and feeding it to livestock.
And then by the shredding, then you also get new root growth off of the crown or stump that then is very tender for refeeding also.
Correct.
You
Yep.
got the root system underneath to support the new shoots, and it really, will continue to grow even if it is grazed.
Right. And it reinvigorates the tree if you do it at the proper time. So you can get trees that, instead of having a maturity of 100 years, they could last hundreds of years.
So now this is a mind-blowing podcast here. We're going to ask everybody to step outside of their normal production paradigm and really consider some different things. You've heard of mowing hay fields or those kind of things, or grazing and watching your grazing height on grasses, but now we're talking grazing trees. So this is a little bit different. Want to go through a little more definitions if we can. First off, savanna. We've mentioned that a few times, and the Savanna Institute. Most people, when you think savanna, they think of Africa and, the big crown trees and some giraffes roaming around and elephants. So that doesn't apply here, right? There is no savannas in North America. That's all in Africa.
No, we had amazing savannas.
Very good. What is a savanna?
So to me, what a savanna is trees with a lush understory of grasses and flowers. But like I mentioned, that we use that as a architecture for designing agroforestry systems. So a tree, so if you think about a forest, it's generally 90 to 100% canopy cover. And when I mention canopy cover, that's like the crown of the tree and the amount of light penetration that's going through the tree and hitting the surface of the soil. So in a savanna, you have 50% canopy cover to 10% canopy cover, and anywhere in that gradient. And underneath is, like I mentioned, it could be tall grass prairie. That's what was historically here in the Midwest. In Iowa, we were roughly 85% prairie and 50% savannas and forest and wetlands. So, I'm not a savanna restorationist purist. I like to use the word reconstructionist, because we can make that decision on how we want to structure that savanna architecture depending on our objectives. So like for me, I'm a grazer. I'm thinking about integrating trees that produce tree fodder, like I mentioned, and rather than thinking about alley cropping chestnuts and pawpaws and that sort of thing, and harvesting that with mechanical equipment. I'm thinking more about how to do that passively with animals.
That's an interesting consideration. I'd never thought of that before, because I'm always thinking about incorporating tree crops on our pastures in order to, stack enterprises and those kind of things, which then comes to, well, now I got to sell nuts, right? Oh, I got to come up with the mechanical equipment to harvest them. And I've always looked at nut crops because that's mechanical option is more. Then your other option's fruit crops, and it's like, ooh, that's lots of labor, and then I have to market it, and I have limited shelf life, and then you think about all that, and you're like, ah. But when you're just mentioning that you can use these for a grazing alternative, that's interesting, and especially in our more humid areas of the United States, right? So a lot of this would apply east of the 100th, would you say?
Yeah, I would think so.
So if
But I
it's
think
historically a
this,
tall grass prairie.
yeah, and I would think, I mean, you can really implement this type of practice in a lot of different ecosystems. As I mentioned, I'm not a restorationist, I'm more of a reconstructionist. So I think you can really construct these type of systems in a lot of different biomes and using, climatically relevant tree species. I could plant a honeyberry here in Wisconsin or Iowa, even though it's technically a Serbian plant, because it can be climatically adapted because it grows in similar conditions in another part of the world.
So if you're a pastoralist, a grazer, listening to the podcast here, or you got some cattle on pasture and you're thinking, I'm already doing this. I've got multifloral rose and Russian olive or autumn olive and mulberries out in my pasture of brome grass. I'm a I'm a agroecologist, agroforester, but maybe not true, right? That's by accident, not by purpose. So, most guys are looking at removing those types of trees and those kind of things. How does this, I think it kind of almost conjure up ideas of a poorly managed pasture. How do you define that difference for guys to kind of give them a vision for what it'd look like when you hit your reconstruction goals?
Right. I think we have to also think about what we're trying to do with livestock, or, we're trying to raise livestock in comfortable conditions, and trees provide shade. And there's peer-reviewed literature out there that suggests that they put on more weight with shade because they're more comfortable. So if you have a mulberry tree that you keep mowing down and it's splatting out, maybe consider protecting that tree for a little bit and letting it go vertical and using it as a form of fodder and shade, 5 to 10 years down the road. And then potentially integrating what we would consider invasive species. Black locust is a fantastic tree, provides fantastic shade, and it's really hardy and rot resistant. You could be using that for growing fence posts and that sort of thing. So I think just thinking creatively about those trees rather than trying to eradicate them, because they're really resilient. Obviously, you've been trying to get rid of them in a pasture and they continue to persist. So you can utilize that to your advantage if you're trying to integrate them strategically.
So when you visited our farm, you were probably cringing when I'm going around trying to talk about these honey locusts that I got. That first off, they got thorns, about 1.5 inches long, and they're just dense canopy and such. And I'm trying to eradicate them, and you're here saying, oh well, that's great fodder. We should save those.
Well,
but
I'm trying to eradicate.
Really need to be managed better, right? To where they're not 100% canopy cover.
Right, and one of my farm philosophies is no thorns. I don't want thorns on my farm, because I don't want to have to get those out of tractor tires and my kid's foot and all that sort of stuff, and livestock too, obviously. But so I'm managing thorny honey locust to get rid of it personally. But instead of just cutting the tree down and spraying it, what I'm doing it is girdling it at chest height. And what it does then is it top kills the tree, but it resprouts at chest height, and then livestock can easily access that resprout growth, and just continuously hitting that over and over again every time they're in those pastures that I'm trying to get rid of that. And that's one example of using what you have while still putting on weight on your animals, but eradicating a species you might not necessarily want.
Okay, so that's a great example. We actually used hogs in those situations too, and that they did the girdling for us.
I bet
that they really, for some reason, they went after those honey locusts. So it could be the fact that higher sugar content or something in the phloem, but they would girdle those. And the thing about them is they repopulate by root. So
Right.
you kill one, you created 100 others. So
Yep.
it's a constant management thing. So another term, silvopasture. Tell us what a silvopasture is.
So it's really the root word there is silviculture, which is production of trees, forestry, essentially. And then pasture, which is open grasslands. So silvopasture is really a technical term for savanna.
Mm-hmm. And the silvopasture is looking more at harvesting the trees then for wood, or is it looking at harvesting them for their fruit too?
So I think it can be a gradient of things. And also you can have silvopasture where you're not doing anything with the trees. You just have trees there for providing shade or fixing nitrogen or whatever.
Wait a minute. Trees fix nitrogen? You're kidding me. I thought you had to buy that.
That's another thing. Trees can fix nitrogen. So incorporating, say, a locust tree along with leguminous plants in the understory, you can be fixing nitrogen and rotating nitrogen in your systems. And that's the other thing, right? Trees don't have to be permanent entities on the farm. You can be rotating fast growing species that are nitrogen fixing on areas that might have low fertility, and then you come in there 15 years later and grow row crops on it. So thinking about longer term rotations with trees is super interesting to me as well.
Okay, I'm getting a headache now. Maybe when we hit $2,000 a ton for ammonia, people get a little nervous. But we hit $4,000 or $5,000 a ton. Trees might be an option, and that's an interesting thing. If you divide your farm into your class A, B, and C soils, this would be a great strategy for those class C soils that should have been pasture anyway, right? But we're farming them because that's what the economics tell us to do. But that'd be an interesting rotation in there, and you could almost alley crop within there and take the nitrogen credit toward or pasture crop within there. You have anybody you worked with that's done that or examples of that? I think the Savanna Institute has some of that going on, don't they?
Yeah, we have some alley cropping systems like that. And what you're mentioning is these systems are really fantastic for what we would consider marginal for row crop production. And then adding fertility to those marginal acres to potentially farm those acres as row crops. But generally we're talking D slopes and up for something like that, where you don't really necessarily want to do tractor work.
Right. And D slope percentages for everybody.
I don't remember exactly. Is it 20%?
I thought it was like 12. We'll have to look it up. So
Or
anyway.
maybe that's I'm thinking E slopes.
I just remember D is for dang steep, and then F is don't farm this. So, but so tell us then, the Savanna Institute who you work for, what all does the Institute do, and what is your role there, and how do farmers connect with the Savanna Institute?
So the Savanna Institute is a nonprofit organization based in Wisconsin. Our main mission is to increase the adoption of agroforestry in the Midwest, to see widespread adoption of agroforestry in the Midwest. And I'm a technical service provider for them. So I help farmers, landowners, and institutional clients and adopt agroforestry and provide technical designs for them and advise on integrating trees and livestock. And generally, I know what my slope values are, but I'm a little nervous being on the podcast. So I'm embarrassed as a soil scientist that I can't remember that offhand.
Well, we won't hold that against you. Kim's probably Googling it right now to find out for us. So, but so a farmer or a landowner wants to do things different. They want to incorporate silvopasture. What do they? What are some of the first steps that you do? Walk through the process of adopting, a Savanna type approach to farming.
Sure. So through Savanna Institute, we have a technical service program. So if farmers are interested in getting technical assistance with a conversation, walking their property, doing a land assessment, site evaluation. And a lot of farmers just want to have that conversation, one-on-one conversation with somebody like an agroforester or grazer that has experience in these sorts of systems, and walk their properties and just get a feel for what they have. And other farmers want to go the whole 9 yards and get a design and something tangible that they can work with, and access to nurseries and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's like any other sort of conservation practice. There's definitely a site visit that's necessary to get, eyes on the ground, boots on the ground, and get a feel for the site's history in particular, and the soil types and soil pH, because trees are really particular about their pH requirements. Just as row crops are also particular, and it's really not too dissimilar from the type of needs that row crops have. Trees have their own particular needs. It's just what's overwhelming is the diversity of trees and how those trees can be put together in a system. So yeah, I help farmers come up with those decisions and where to integrate trees and what type of trees and how many, and whether they're in clusters or alleys or that sort of thing.
So one of the things I talked about a little bit earlier was sitting in the combine cabin, having some thoughts about things. And in particular, we have a customer appreciation event we do out in California. And I was just thinking about, well, what am I going to say? And there's a lot of realities coming to head in California in regards to water, in regards to labor, and all the bureaucratic business nightmare that goes on in California. And those things have been going on since we started the business there in 2001. And I think they're finally getting to a point where something's got to give. California is an amazingly resilient state because of its abundant resources, both in weather and people, innovation and land and water and all those kind of things. But we've pushed the abundance button. We've pushed on that too many times, and the water restrictions in many areas that get well water only is being cut in half. So almond tree with full water does well. With half water, it doesn't do much of anything. So what do you do, right? And I put a presentation together based on what I was thinking is like the context, right? So if you look at what the Central Valley of California was originally, it was a short grass prairie because you had a Mediterranean climate. It was spring rains and summer runoffs, a lot of marshland that was flat, easy to drain and furrow irrigate and those kind of things. So, but if you look at the further away from the original state, here's my point after rambling on all that time. The further away from the original state, the natural state prior to us changing it, that you venture, the more and more inputs that it requires, whether it's water inputs, dollar inputs, fertilizer, chemical inputs, labor inputs, processing inputs, the further away from that natural state you are, the more costs involved to maintain that unnatural state. So as our resources go away, the closer we can come to the natural state to produce an economic beneficial food or something that is of value, the better we are, right? So is that, I'm sorry for talking for so long here, but what I'm getting at is the further away from the natural context we are, whether it's in the Corn Belt, the further we are from a tall grass prairie with a tree here and there, the more dollars it requires. So the more tillage we do, the more dollars. The more inputs we apply, the more dollars. So whether it's in California where we have to apply the water, or in a short grass prairie and maybe Western Kansas or something where we have to apply water and those kind of things to these annual crops, the further we are from a short grass prairie in those areas, or from a seasonal prairie flood shed in California, or from a savanna, we've built a system that is input and cost dependent, right? But if you go to the savanna approach, you're really looking at what is your input? You, right?
Yep, people.
So help me develop my theory there a little bit, because that's the combine thinking here. Do you agree with that, or where am I thinking wrong here?
So I think you're thinking right first. That the systems that we have right now are very input dependent. And the reason they're input dependent is because they're at a large scale and they're monocultures for the most part. And the convenient thing about a monoculture is that it can be cultivated by one person. And that's been the appeal of a row crop system, that it's fairly easy to calculate the inputs and outputs. It's a neat and tidy box for the most part, which I think is the appeal of being a row crop farmer. But as we think about rising fuel costs and rising input costs, and having to import all of those inputs that you're using on the farm, where you could be cycling them in a regenerative way with other methods, as we mentioned with silvopasture, Savanna system, you're not really importing any nutrients to maintain that system to be productive, versus a row crop system where you have your annual reset button, and you order all your supplies and you plant and you do your thing for the season, and then you harvest, and here you are on the podcast the day after the combine. And I think, like I mentioned, that's the appeal of the system, is that we can do it in a linear way, and it's calculated. You can calculate your costs up front. But I think that's also what makes it vulnerable to fluctuating markets, because you're relying on those inputs to produce that particular commodity. So the appeal to me for a Savanna type structure as a grazer is I'm not having to grow the feed that my animals are eating, because they're grass based, and grass is really nice because it runs on photosynthesis, as we all know. And then we can integrate trees, and the nice thing about trees is that they can add value to the system by helping with cycling nutrients, adding fertility, sequestering carbon, improving water quality, providing wildlife habitat, and then all of the other more traditional commodities of fruits and nuts and tree fodder.
Yeah, and you look at it's really a matter of how you think, right? It's easy, it's clean, it's simple when you're in a annual crop system. When you start thinking about these kind of things, and if we have some row crop farmers listening right now, they're probably like, "Oh, that is out there. How in the world would I ever do that?" So I'm going to ask you, and you've got some technology experience and those kind of things, but you're not a technologist or a startup type thing. How do you see these emerging technologies that are coming today being able to aid farmers to make it the easy button, right? Because we've chosen to do what we do because it's the easier button. And you look at labor per acre when you're an owner operator, how much can I do? Or if you're a large business, you're still looking at labor per unit produced. How do you see some of these technologies today that are coming out making this more attainable for people to think differently in a agroforestry or Savanna based production model?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's really great about the row crop matrix that we have right now is that it's taken a significant amount of will engineering and investment in the infrastructure, and we have a lot of amazing technology that's come from the system, with RTK, precision ag tools, being able to do grid sampling and add nutrients in very well targeted methods, rather than blanket applications and so on. Go ahead.
Say this so you don't have to. We've become really good at doing the wrong thing right.
I like,
right? I mean, we're professionally doing the wrong thing.
But I think, row crops are a great blank canvas for integrating diversity, because like I mentioned, you do have that annual reset button, and then you have a blank slate that you're starting every year. So every time you're starting to paint your new canvas, you can add a little bit of diversity onto that canvas. So if that's cover crops and you graze the cover crops, then that's fantastic. Maybe the next year you integrate no-till and you grow cover crops and you crimp that cover crop and you maybe add another like Sudan grass and graze that, and then eventually maybe you stop growing row crops and you just become a grazer. I don't know. That's
Well, there is a path. I think that's
there's a
the hope.
path.
If you want to do better, you want to try what is possible, there is a path to transition. And you mentioned early there, the assets that are involved to do the modern row crop production. You still got to make the payments on those, right? Because not everybody's just writing checks for, $1 million combines these days.
Right. Especially not me.
I don't think anybody is.
But back to your question about how those tools can be used for something like this is, agroforestry it doesn't have to be like this chaotic system that has an insane amount of species, having everything in the book, right? It can be an alley cropping system that's integrated into a row crop setup that's linear, where you have lines of trees and that are precision planted and precision managed, just like you would have row crops and side dressing and that sort of stuff, or haying in between. But that's what I like about agroforestry. It's adaptable and flexible depending on your objectives, and you could have it be in a linear setup, or you could have it in clusters, or have it be a little bit more chaotic looking from the outside. It just kind of depends. But the cool thing about it is that we have precision tools. So depending on what you want to do, you can have it be a really sophisticated precision linear type setup, or you can have it be a little bit more wild. That's more like a savanna that's just for grazing, and maybe you have some fruit and nut trees that you're just using for a U-pick operation or just for family use.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm.
So, it's a matter of, we have a lot of tools that have been developed in the traditional or the today's conventional agricultural context that can apply to there. So, precision planting of the trees, and like you said, and alley spacing and all that. What I want to lean on is a little more is with the advancement of robotics into agriculture, the advancement of artificial intelligence and sensors, that can see and make automated decisions. How could some of those things integrate into agroforestry and help make this more attainable for farmers?
I love that you asked this question, because I'm actually a total tech dweeb and love to think about how to integrate some of these more sophisticated technologies into these systems.
You said it, not me.
Yeah. Well, I wear it proudly. It's a badge. But I think there's a couple really amazing technologies that are available right now, and I think the number one is virtual fencing. And I think your listeners have probably heard about virtual fencing. I think you've had No Fence on the podcast before, but just to really recap that real quickly, it's not a buried line. It's a solar powered collar with a rechargeable lithium ion battery inside of it, and it's got two metal straps that hang on the side of the neck, and it gives a 3 kilovolt zap if they don't respect the virtual boundary. And the way that they learn that boundary is through an auditory cue. So as they're approaching the boundary, it makes an escalating pitch. It goes boop, 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 boop. And if they continue to move forward, it gives them a shock. And eventually what they learn is that through the auditory cue, they can turn around and go back to pasture. So it's a pretty slick technology. Megan and I are using that on our farm right now for our goats, and it really opens up so many opportunities for grazing marginal land. Before we integrated virtual fence, I was spending weeks building tunnels and high density brush to be able to pull electronet through and use a solar energizer. And it's a labor of love, right? Because I have a deep romance with the oak savannas, and I want to see them flourish. And, I'm willing to get out there and get eaten alive by mosquitoes and do the chainsaw work to pull netting through there. But now I don't have to do that anymore. I can just move them from my phone. So it's pretty amazing stuff.
I think everybody listening to this needs to have the opportunity to work with ElectroNet.
Yeah.
It's a great, don't get me wrong, it's a great solution. But it's bad enough just keeping ElectroNet not get tangled up while you're holding it.
Yep. But I think
Imagine the wires behind your TV, okay, that
Yep.
just magically entangle themselves somehow while you're sleeping, times 1,000,000. That's about what it's like. And then
Yep.
that's just carrying it on. And then you put it out on grassland and it still manages to kind of get tangled up on something all the time. But watching goat grazers go through the puckle brush, because that's what goats like to eat, woody species. So they're restoring, forests and those kind of things. I watched somebody do that and I'm like, man, that is
oh man,
that is
it
next
is
level work.
it
Congratulations
is
to you.
yeah, it's such a patience. It's a Zen practice, right?
It's something. But
But
so virtual fencing now makes that definitely a possibility for that.
Yeah.
Plus, you can actually exclude zones, right? So if you have
exactly.
certain tree species that you just planted or something you don't want them to graze on, you can exclude them from an area.
Yep.
Now I heard that the only fence that holds a goat is one that holds air. So
I've heard of the water piece, but I guess air
holds
works
water.
too.
Yeah. Well, now give me a break. Does this really work?
Oh yeah, it works so great. It's when you see it working, you're just like smiling ear to ear and eating jerky. I don't know.
Wow.
It's really pretty amazing stuff. And
But what
I'm
about
actually
your Zen? What about your Zen training though? I'm worried
but,
that's going to fail.
well now I can do the chainsaw work without having to pull netting. So I get the best of both worlds where I can watch the goats graze an area and then totally clear it out for me, and I can come in there and do the rest of the mechanical thinning and start burning in there and so on. But
Well, you're not the only one. I call that tree therapy.
yeah,
So
totally.
I like to go out on the weekends and have some tree therapy and get rid of invasive species. It makes my day.
But there's a couple other technologies I want to kind of throw on the plate here too that I'm particularly excited about. Some that haven't been really formally developed that I feel that are coming down the pipeline. And one of them that's strategic for agroforestry is robotic mowers. So as we're establishing trees, that labor for mowing is significant, especially in an organic system. If you're not organic, then you can use, sprays, and that's convenient and everything. But even that takes time, right? Because you have to go and spray down every tree, and
you
it's a
run the
huge
risk of
investment.
spraying the tree itself. So
Right.
I mean, you got certain days you can do it. Plus, you're hand operating, right?
Yep.
So the person's exposed to the chemicals. None of those things are fun. So a
Yep.
robotic mower would be great in conventional or organic.
Right. And there's some robotic mowers that are being developed right now that haven't hit the market yet. And we at Savanna Institute have been lucky to have some of those conversations with some of those mower companies. And with sensing technology the way it is now, we can identify different types of biomass based on their leaf shapes and all kinds of super interesting things that come with that. And I think the next level of that is water wagons that rove the landscape while they're mowing and doing weeding and maybe some strategic burning and stuff. So what I fantasize about on my own farm is having a rover that can access holding tanks and move water around and pump water for me automatically without having me worry about moving water or reels or powering it with solar and that sort of stuff.
I'm with you. That's the same thing. So once we have the virtual fence that can go in anywhere, any shape, any size, now water supply being delivered with linear lines that holds us back, if you will. We
Yep,
can only go
totally.
to the water source or if we have I got a 1,900-foot hose reel that I can drag anywhere, but still labor intense. The
Yep.
next step is having automated water that can follow the paddock that they're in.
And with inflatable tubs and all that sort of thing that can be deployed from the rover. And the other cool thing is you could use it as a platform for drones. So they could be charging themselves on the rover, and you can use that drone for remote sensing biomass and moving them based on pasture biomass. But the thing with these technologies, though, it does like the automation is fantastic and everything, and the potential is there. But I don't want it to eliminate the human shadow on the land. So I
The-
think there's a balance there.
I agree. You don't want to lose the human shadow, but the human shadow needs to be doing things that are of higher value. So
Right.
of making bigger value decisions versus the problem that's happening now is we're taking all of our time hauling the water or setting the fence and doing all those daily things and miss the animal health or miss the grazing amounts or those kind of
Right.
things. I think it really changes that. And we've talked before, I think, on another episode, I'd really like to get to a system that uses imagery, whether it be drone, fixed wing, or satellite, that assesses all of your forage content, and it could assess the forestry content too. What is the biomass and quality? So essentially, what do I have total ranch wide calories today, and how is that growing over time? And then automatically determine the pasture moves based on, when things are growing fast as a grazer, what do you do?
Yep. Yep.
You move faster. And when
Yep.
things are growing slow, you move slower. So that can help with those decisions because, even 70-year-old grazers will tell you they still don't know everything they need to know. And for someone to just go into this, you pay a lot of tuition at first, right? And
Yep.
making mistakes.
I think that potential there, we're totally on the same page with that potential, and it's super exciting. And I wish it could just happen now, because I want to see it happening for buffering the ecosystem service benefits of what we do as regenerative grazers, because I think right now it's really difficult to make that assessment quickly without significant investment in carbon analysis and that sort of thing. And I think there's other metrics that we can be using to incentivize farmers to adopt these systems more readily. But policy needs to catch up to the fact that grazers can be public servants and improve water quality for everybody.
Yeah,
So I
that's
think
there's a lot of revenue streams that need to come in from what we're doing. But yeah, the catch up will take, unfortunately, a long time. But no, I'm excited I'll just share with you. I'm sure no one else is listening. So anyway, but we're actually doing the imagery thing next year on our farm with our pastures. So we're going to start collecting a data set and begin that work on auto grazing is what we're calling it. So we'll see what happens. And we need to touch base on getting the robotic watering system. We got to get somebody working on that. So that's above and beyond what I can do personally. So
I have some designs drafted, but I'm not an engineer. So the concept drafts.
Perfect. We'll share notes, and we need to get somebody from UCO or Greenfield or something like that have been on the podcast to help us out.
So I'm curious about your auto grazing. Are you doing that via drone or satellite imagery, or?
It'll be a large drone. So hope to get the satellite. The problem with satellite is today, you don't always get coverage, and we're at 50 centimeter size, which is pretty good. We want to get a little more. We want to get a little more detail, but we're able to incorporate that just to the platform doesn't matter so much. It's the getting the data, right? So
Right.
we want to get the data and the analysis of the data to be able to spit out what we have. So we have to do some ground truthing with what is forage quality equal to this reflectance and those kind of things. So yeah, stay tuned.
I think that
We'll have to come over and help.
I think that's exactly the type of tech that we need to be able to integrate livestock at scale. So, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the Midwest Grazing Exchange, but it's basically a Tinder for cows, right? Where you can plant cover crops, and if you don't have cows, you can have somebody come with cows and graze those cover crops. But it's the automation part of that is exciting. So if you have a whole network of farmers that are planting cover crops in a continuous corridor, and so you have 1,000 head that want to move through that corridor, then you can automate that now with the type of technologies that we're talking about, and move those livestock across the landscape, and potentially finish them on the landscape too, on their way to processing and packing facilities. But we'd have to integrate these type of technologies at scale. But I think the potential is there for sure.
And I think and there's a lot of opportunities for different crops that are emerging, demand for peas or other buckwheat, other shorter season crops or overwinter crops that have a higher value that you can harvest, plant the summer cover crop in June or 1st of July and bring that up. And then, like you said, meet with a grazer and connect and create multiple revenue streams off of that acreage and diversify your crop rotation so that your corn and soybeans in the future are better, right?
Yep.
Or same thing in a permanent crop in almonds, integrating grazing opportunities there. So on years that we have excess water or good winter rain, we can get more grazing opportunities there and not tax the ecosystem. So I like that. The Midwest Grazing Exchange, you'll have to check that out. So a little bit, I always believe you need to be in the crawl, walk, run, mindset of trying new things. And unfortunately, we've been talking a lot on the full board turbo thrust run here lately. Want to talk a little more on the crawl thing. You did a lot of work with prairie strips, and I think this is pretty fascinating. And I was at a meeting, I think we were together there at the same meeting, talking about just incorporating 10% of the acreage to prairie strips can nearly double the diversity and of insects and birds and such on 100% of the acres. So I mean, it only takes 10% of the acres to make double of the impact. Talk to us a little bit about the work you've done there and what that's all about on prairie strips.
Great. Yeah, the Prairie Strips program in Iowa State was founded in 2007, and their main goal there was, finding out how much prairie is necessary to integrate into row crops to get the benefit of prairie. And as we all know, prairie produces clean water and there's abundant wildlife. And so how can we get those results while still growing row crops? And over what has it been now? It's been over 10 years of research, of fantastic peer-reviewed literature conducted by multi-institutional partners. Like you mentioned, what they identified is that 10% prairie can reduce soil erosion by 95% and increase bird abundance and pollinator habitat significantly, which is not surprising. But it's the strategic placement of those prairies that make the difference. So at the toe slope or upslope versus a mid slope. But what I did for them is I coordinated the project for 4 years at ISU and took a lot of pretty photos with drones and got those published in various media outlets and wrote articles exposing folks to the concept of integrating prairie into row crops.
And this is a great opportunity for maybe less than productive areas of the farm, turn rows that are maybe on side hills.
Right.
That's a great thing. Looking at, instead of a filter strip where we're trying to catch it at the last minute, like you said, at the toe slope, trying to hold it further up the landscape on the erosion and nutrients and such. Where are other applications for these prairie strips that were very beneficial?
So in a terrace channel is good too. They can take the place of a terrace. Obviously, it kind of depends on the slope length and stuff, and how much land you want to take production. How much land you want to take out of production for that terrace. But alongside waterways is another good spot too, because it can filter sediment on the way to the waterway. So the other thing is, it doesn't have to be a linear strip either. It depends on the property and the layout of the land, but I think the main goal is to intercept water. And the reason prairie works so well is because it has stiff stems, so it slows water down rather than flop over like a brome grass, where you want to convey water away from the field. So they're not supposed to replace waterways. So a waterway is supposed to have a grass that lays down flat during a heavy rain, and a prairie can slow down water because of the stiff stems.
So that's interesting. I've always wondered about why we don't use prairie grasses in waterways. I'd rather keep the water on the landscape, but why is that? Is that just why aren't we using those stiffer stems to hold it back in the waterways themselves? Because the water then would go outside of the waterway. Is that the fear?
But I think you could, but I think the fear for row crop farmers is that like, you know, the waterway is an area of conveyance for the water, so it would probably just turn into a wet spot, which I don't think would be a terrible thing, but I think the fear would be like the water table would start rising and you might not get as proper drainage alongside that prairie. That's just a guess though. I don't know if they've done research. I'm kind of out of touch with that now that I've been away from ISU for a minute.
Sure. Well, a minute, a little more than that, but no, the prairie strips. I think that's an excellent opportunity for people to investigate and Google that, because a small amount of land, and it can be some of your more marginal land, can be set out, and I think there's programs with the NRCS to funding and such to make those things offset themselves, but it can make a huge difference on the impact of the balance of your acres. And if you're a hunter or you like wildlife in general, it's an opportunity for that too. So,
And I can speak a little bit to the cost share component. So first, I will give a shout out to prairiestrips.org. That's the website for Iowa State. If you want to find out more, that's a great place to get connected, and lots of fantastic resources. But as you mentioned, it is available for cost share via the NRCS through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and then also CRP through FSA. So that practice is called CP43 prairie strips, and it's one of the most flexible CRP practices. And there's sign-up incentives because it's considered a climate smart practice. So I think still it's the only CRP practice where you might not be able, or you might not have to pay out of pocket for anything. So that's pretty fantastic.
yeah,
And yeah,
definitely worth looking into there on that. And a lot of the CRP has become a little less available, so they're targeting, you know, pollinator habitat and I think these prairie strips. So that's an excellent thing. We're running short on time here today. We do want to give a little shout out to Savanna Institute and how people connect with you. Tell us that.
You bet. That's savannainstitute.org. And then my email is omar@savannainstitute.org. We have a fantastic adoption team. I'm not the only technical service provider. There's Matt Wilson and then Sven Pill, and we're in the process of increasing the size of our team right now. So that's exciting as well.
Glad to hear that. More impact that way. Anything else we should have talked about today while we had our time together, Omar?
If you're thinking about planting trees, you can do it. There's so many things that we could dive into still, and I think row crop farmers have such a great opportunity to integrate complexity into their fields, and whether that's with a prairie or with trees and livestock, I think there's creative ways to grow multiple crops, and not only crops, but these more diverse systems bring people back to the land. And I think we can all agree that families on farms is what we want to see, and happy people on those farms, and nutrient dense food, and opportunities for young and beginning farmers. That's what these agroforestry systems can deliver for us. All of those nice cultural perks while improving the environment. It sounds like something I want to support and am supporting, and hope others can support as well.
And it improves the soil, and it improves, you know, economic returns and diversity for the farmer too. So it's a real win all the way around. So thank you for what you're doing and helping and advising others. I hope people's minds were expanded a little bit today. And like you said, you don't have to start with trees. You can, you know, start with the cover crop, go to no-till, do some integrated grazing, go to a small grain and integrate summer cover crops and graze there. Then once you've done that much, you're kind of hooked. And then Omar knows he has you, and you'll be talking trees next. So that's where I'm at. So I hope other people consider that too. And we sure thank you for your time today, Omar.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. I'll bet this conversation got you rethinking the definition of agroforestry and the opportunities of integrating trees and livestock into agricultural landscapes and what that could mean for soil health. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers implement soil health practices, check out our website at asn.farm. And there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.